Welcome back to Focus Today, and we are hitting on a subject that's been in the news recently, and I think you probably heard a little bit about it, but the question is, what is really the backstory here about the controversy of the Temple Mount? I mean, it's something that Israelis have been using as a place of worship and observance for years, but now something has changed. Well, Laurie Cardoza-Moore is with us. She's the president and founder of Proclaiming Justice for the Nations. Laurie, good to have you here, and I'm glad to be able to sit here and not have Perry get in our way.
Good morning.
Good to have you here. All right, you need to tell us a little bit of this backstory because it's kind of hit the news and then all of a sudden it's gone, and yet it really isn't gone because, as we all know, Israel and the Temple Mount, they're just inextricably tied together. There's no way that you can separate the two, but something like that seems to be happening. What is going on there?
Well, let's go back historically, Steve, from a biblical perspective, because, you know, that's our mission at Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, to educate Christians about our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel. And this is key. This is paramount to our mission, because the Temple Mount has always been part of Judaism's holiest site. It is the site where two temples, the first and second temples, were built. It is the site where the third temple is going to be built as well. And unfortunately, UNESCO is again putting out propaganda eliminating completely the historical connection of the Jewish people to this piece of territory, accusing Israel of being an occupying power in the resolution. So if we go back, we know that Solomon built the first temple, Herod built the second temple, and this has always been a holy site. Even the Western Wall, which is a retention wall that held up the original temple that's set up on a platform. They've even changed the name of the Western Wall area, which is the location that Jews are able to go and pray freely to. They talk about how the occupying power, Israel, is preventing the Muslims to be able to worship freely on the Temple Mount. Of course, we know Al-Aqsa Mosque sits there, resides there, and it has since about 660, 680. After the Common Era. So we have this issue where Israel's being accused of preventing Muslims from worshiping, when the reality is, it's Jews and Christians who are prevented from going up there. We are in the process of finishing up our next documentary, Hating Israel in Search of the Truth Behind BDS. And when we were there in December, we were able to get a private tour with the rabbi up on the Temple Mount. It was first thing early in the morning. We had to go early in the morning because we would be there before many of the Muslims would come to pray. It was 7:30. We got up on that Temple Mount. By the Muslims that were there, we were shouted down and yelled at. And on that same day, ironically, there was an Israeli police officer who was stabbed from a Muslim who was waiting in line because they wouldn't let the Muslims up on the Temple Mount while we were there. We were told explicitly, we are not allowed to pray. Don't even move your lips and look like you're praying, because the Muslims will have a fit. The propaganda that is coming out of UNESCO and is flooding, they put this stuff out. And you know what? You can't pull it back in. And that's why, Steve, it is so critically important that Christians speak up and condemn UNESCO. There is contact information. They can Google it on the website. There is a New York-based office. Christians need to call UNESCO and condemn this outrage, to completely deny any existence of the Jewish presence on this Temple Mount and completely only use Muslim terms. It's dangerous for us as Christians, because we're not seeing this just with the Temple Mount in Israel. UNESCO's responsibility at the UN is to ensure that they protect the freedom of worship in all holy sites all over the world. We are watching Christian churches being destroyed, 1,800 years old in the Middle East. Christian churches are being destroyed by Muslims. Why? Because they are trying to eliminate any trace of any history of any other religion prior to Islam. And so if you think about it, how dangerous this is, Steve, in 50 years or 100 years, because combine this with the whole propagandizing of our children in our textbooks that are not just here in the United States. This is happening globally. They are rewriting history. And the generation that is coming up around the world is going to have a completely different perspective than you and I are. And that's why it's so important that we as Christians stand in defense of that, because we are tied to Judaism. We are a sect of Judaism. And if they eliminate Jewish history, they will eliminate Christianity's history as well.
All right. I want to talk to you about what you hit on there about UNESCO kind of taking another stage moving forward from this. But I think anybody who has been to the Middle East, if you've been to Jerusalem, if you've seen the Wailing Wall and that entire environment there, you realize this is tied into who the Jewish state is. I mean, it's the lifeblood. This is the place they worship. For UNESCO to try to redefine that right now just seems to be ridiculous. But it sounds like what you're saying is if they start now, that within a generation it could be seen totally different publicly than it is right now, which is inextricably tied with Israel.
Absolutely. Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish state. It is the capital of Israel. And if we do not fight and demand accountability from the United Nations, we give billions of dollars over the years to the Arabs, to the Muslims, to the Palestinians, to the UN that funds organizations like UNESCO at the United Nations. We need to demand that they put back in the historical evidence. They should never have referred to this as just Al-Aqsa Mosque. Yes, Al-Aqsa Mosque has been there since, like I said, 660, 680. But that does not compare to the building of the first temple under King Solomon. That territory has always been strategically connected to the Jewish people. And it's critically important. We are Christians that study our Bibles. And this is so important that we've got to stand up and demand accountability. This is an outrage. And the only person that I hear, I haven't heard any other Christian organizations or denominations condemning this. Only the Israeli government. And the Israeli government is protecting Christian sites in Israel as well. It's not just been the Temple Mount. This has been an issue with the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron. It's the cave of the patriarchs. It's where the patriarchs and the matriarchs are buried. It's the tomb of Joseph. It's Rachel's tomb. All of these places have been targeted by UNESCO. It has been targeted by Muslims, by Palestinians who have tried to desecrate and destroy these places. Even years ago, I think it was in 2009, when the Church of the Nativity was desecrated by the Palestinians when they tried to take it over. If we have to understand history is critically important. We have to preserve it. If we don't, Steve, we will lose any connection. Remember, it was Yeshua, Jesus, was walking in the Temple Mount on Hanukkah. The temple was part of his activity. He was preaching in the synagogues. He was walking on the Temple Mount. We as Christians have got to speak up and demand accountability by UNESCO. And if they don't reverse and they don't correct this, I was just in New York City last week meeting with several ambassadors and delegates to the different missions of the UN on other issues, but this one also in particular, that this is an outrage, that this is going on, and the Secretary General just completely ignores it. Nobody else condemns it. The United States doesn't condemn it. Samantha Powers doesn't speak out against it. It's only Israel standing alone at the United Nations.
Well, what is it you think is behind the motivation behind UNESCO to cause this to happen? I mean, what do you really think is going on there? There's obviously some sort of an influence that is trying to minimize the Temple Mount importance to the Jews. What is that?
Well, it's Islam. Islam is trying to erase all history, except when history began with Islam. And UNESCO has bought into it. We have to realize that the United Nations is slowly being taken over by Islamic countries. And there is a narrative that is being pushed at the United Nations that is unbiblical. that doesn't support the historical evidence. There's a documentary that we produced called Israel Indivisible, The Case for the Ancient Homeland. In that film, it is the definitive documentary about Israel's rights to historical, archaeological, legal, and biblical rights to her ancient homeland. Your viewing audience and your listening audience can listen to it or go to PJTN.org to get a copy and watch it. It is the definitive film about this issue. We have to be educated. We have to educate ourselves so that we can stand up. If you look at what's happening, the Arabs, the Palestinians are excavating under the Temple Mount. They have been removing artifacts and dumping them in garbage dumps. Thank God there were Jews who saw what was happening, and they have gone to those dumps and they have picked up those artifacts, and now they're sifting through them across the valley to retain, to show the history. It's where one of Hezekiah's, King Hezekiah's seals was found recently, back in November, actually, when we were there.
Is that right? Yeah, I remember that discovery, and so that's tied in with the same type of debris, so to speak, that's being tossed out?
That's exactly right. This is thousands of years of history being dumped into a garbage dump by the Palestinians. They are trying to eliminate any Jewish connection to the territory. The area that they're excavating apparently is the area where King Solomon's stables were, where the horses were kept. It's very important, Steve, that Christians understand, this is a time when we have to speak up, because we're losing the battle for history because of the propaganda war. And it's why organizations like ours, PJTN, and the World Council of Independent Christian Churches, our work at the United Nations, is so critically important. But if we as Christians do not speak up, and don't think that one person, it won't make a difference, because if it's one person and another person who speak out, who make that phone call and demand accountability, call our UN mission, the U.S. UN mission, and ask Samantha Powers to demand that UNESCO rephrase that and add the connection, the Jewish connection, to that language.
Now, we haven't heard much, of course, in news reports about this. Do you think we're going to hear anything more? Is this pretty much a dead item from that standpoint?
Only through PJTN and other Christian networks like yours, like theDove.
Interesting.
It's
so, go ahead.
It's going to be us. It has to be the Christians, because there aren't enough Jewish media outlets to put this message out. We are competing against a secular media, global media around the world, who refuse to recognize Israel's rights to her ancient homeland. This is a way of rewriting that history, ultimately, for the Jews to lose their connection, and Christianity as well.
Now, this might be a new idea of what we've been talking about for some people. Again, I've heard about it, but then I didn't hear anything more after the initial report. If they go to your website, they can find out more about the backstory on this. Is that right?
Yeah. The article is posted on the website, and also how Christians can get involved. We have to speak up. We can't just sit back and say, oh, it's going to happen. The end times are going to happen anyways. We're going to be held accountable, Steve, to what we do and what we don't do at this hour. We were raised up to be here when the state of Israel was reborn. And what a privilege that is, because think of the Jews and Christians who came before us who never had this opportunity. It was still a prophecy yet to be fulfilled. And God, by his wisdom, allowed us to be born, to come into the world. And I remind the listeners of what Obadiah said. And God told the prophet that in the last days, he would wipe out the descendants of Edom, because they stood by while their brother Jacob was held in captivity and they did nothing. We as Christians cannot stand by when we have the facts. We have a Bible that tells us the truth, that God made an eternal covenant with the Jewish people. And God is going to unite Jews and Christians together in the last days to fight against this enemy. That's why we're seeing Christians and Jews being targeted, why you see Christians and Jews being butchered in the streets of Israel, or Christians having their heads cut off and slaughtered in Middle East countries surrounding Israel. There's a great scripture in Zechariah, chapter 9, verses 13 and 14, where the Lord says, I will bend Judah as a bow for me. I will fill the hand of Ephraim with a bow, and I will stir up your children, O Zion, against your children, O Greece. It is Greco-Romanism that has crept into the church and to the secular world, denying any right and any existence to this land. That's why we as Christians who know our Bible must speak up, Steve.
All right. Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, talking about a new documentary, too. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but I know we will. It's called Hating Israel. You can go to the same website, PJTN.org, and we'll continue our discussion and also anything more that has to do with this whole thing of the sacred aspect of the Mount site and whether UNESCO is going to do more to diminish that for Israel. I know you'll be keeping us up to date. Thanks, Laurie. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, coming up, we're going to be focusing a little bit on some of the elections going on here in the state, the state Senate seat that you will be voting on coming up in just a few minutes with one of the candidates, Dennis Linthicum, here on Focus Today.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.